Welcome back to this edition, rather, of The Fix with me, Karima Brown. In the studio, I've got Mr. Rudy Dix and, of course, also Tulani, who is speaking to us about the 25-year review. Now, the nice thing about being a journalist in this job is that, obviously, your ears are always open. So I was just listening to conversation about an urgent cabinet meeting that was held on Friday, and that all civil servants appear to have been given the possibility that they are not going to go on leave. Now, we know that the President has been emphatic about that around ESCOM. Tulani, let me start with you. Are you making leave plans, or is the Presidency going to require you to be in your place, considering the really bad situation we are in? I think many South Africans, when they go to the shops, when they look at servicing their debt, when they are going to be confronted with buying school children's clothing for the new school year, will realize how very difficult it actually is. And then, of course, that constant worry about whether you're going to be without a job or not.
So the specific announcement was made about ESCOM management, that the President has said no one's going on leave. But just to say, all civil servants are on call 24/7. Yeah. Right now we're approaching December. In the education sector, the key point now is about the results, the matric results. So people are working around the clock to ensure that...
So you are saying, in terms of education, the civil servants will be in place. They will actually be in place. And one could probably say the same for transport.
And for health. So we're always on call. You know, we won't close health facilities. And even ourselves in our department, you can be recalled anytime for any purpose. So that's why I'm saying we are on call 24/7. And as the need arises, might be
if the cabinet's decision is, that we need to, be available for any particular intervention, urgent intervention, that's what we're here for.
Let's take ESCOM, for example. So there is a war room. The President gets a report on a weekly basis. On the issue of gender-based violence, he gets a report almost every Monday. And yet, when he speaks, he says he's shocked about things. Now, obviously, you can't speak for the Presidency, but is there some kind of disconnect between how the departments actually inform the President about some of these really big issues that are playing itself out, in the country? We saw the President on his way to Egypt. He was obviously going to take over from El-Sisi at the AU, but there was also a lot of talk about discussions around Transnet with Egypt and rail facilities. But he flew back, and the impression is created that you are caught napping when the problems are actually acutely diagnosed by yourselves in the 25-year review. The recommendations are there. Why are we still having people shocked?
I don't think there's a disconnect. I certainly don't think there's a disconnect between the President and what is happening. The President has made a number of decisions and choices. There are particular teams that are there. There's no war room for ESCOM. But he has 2 or 3 different committees that are looking at, including the Public Enterprises Minister, where there are specific sets of people that are looking at the crisis, one from a financial point of view, one from a technical and maintenance point of view. I don't think so. I don't think there's a disconnect. There's a clear plan. I suppose what has happened was that, a number of factors had contributed to it, despite the fact that I think, one would have to recognize that poor maintenance regime, not being able to ensure that we complete the Medupi the new build program, have all contributed to the fact that we were at stage 6 load shedding. I think there's a plan in place, and I think the President has announced that. There are particular interventions that we're going to do, and the announcement, as Tulani has said, that leave for all senior managers, to ensure that we do the correct thing in ensuring that ESCOM is able to run and provide the electricity generation. On a number of other areas, I think there's a clear program. I think it's important that, particularly from the media point of view, that there's an expectation that the President will have to be available all the time or respond on all the things. I mean, I think what President Ramaphosa has done has set into motion a number of teams that are working around the clock, gender-based violence, on, for example, youth intervention and the job summit that I'm working on Dr. Hoshencho Ramahopa, for example, that is working on infrastructure and investment. I think that there's a clear plan in place. Progress is, is happening, and that we need to see and give a bit of time to ensure that this does.
Let me give you an example of whether that disconnect isn't as shouldn't be dismissed as you are dismissing it. We've had a major gang battle playing itself out in the Western Cape. We've had Rashid Staghi, the brother of Rashad Staghi, that was burnt almost 2 decades ago in London Road in Cape Town, a place that I am very familiar with. I used to walk down the road there to go to the station to come home from school. He was shot and killed. But prior to that, 10 people from a particular gang was killed. It's all linked to a turf war. We've had the army in the Western Cape. Organised crime is part of the subculture of that province. It makes up part of the economic ways in which we count money in that province. What is the plan for the festive season? Why have we had no one from either the presidency or the Ministry of Police or even the provincial ministry say to the people of the Western Cape, especially the Cape Flats, that your lives matter, and that you are not going to be caught in the crossfire as organised crime slug it out and kill people as they have done over the last couple of days. Not a single word from a single MEC or minister, the provincial, the Premier completely quiet on the matter. This is on the same day that 5,000 cadets gets released from the SAPS to be put into, to put through their paces for the Christmas season, when people on the Cape Flats are actually looking at a potential bloodbath.
So the situation in the Western Cape, particularly on the Cape Flats, is of concern to everybody, including all the people you have mentioned. First of all, I do agree with Rudy, there's no disconnect. When the president says he's shocked, it's at the brutality of this violence that we see, which gets worse and worse on a daily basis. The Minister of Police has been on SABC, I think, and other media platforms, talking about the crime situation in the country. And his exact words were Zizo Jigizinto, which means change is coming. We're going to implement a very effective strategy.
But how does the woman in Manenberg believe that change is coming when the death toll keeps on rising? After Rashid Staghi was killed, we had a little young girl caught in the crossfire. I have relatives who are trapped in their homes in places like Mitchell's Plain. They can't go outside, literally. They can't play because they're going to get killed. What is the state saying to them, and what boots on the ground are you going to put there to ensure that people don't die? I mean, it's a killing field. We all know that.
And that is why there's been this national intervention, which we've also mentioned, which includes all our law enforcement agencies, including eventually the army. Karima, it can't be a knee-jerk reaction. The first thing one must say is that every single death is one too many. And that is why I'm saying it's of concern to all of us. But you can't have a knee-jerk reaction to every single incident, because it happens across the country. Yes, it's more pronounced in the Western Cape. That is why it needs an organized strategy. And we have seen some success, especially about the current minister, Minister Kwele. We have seen since he's taken over. And when he says there's a plan in place, it has started with some results. Certain areas have shown progress, have shown success. We're coming to the Western Cape. Again, we must also not make crime and violence a policing matter only. No. There's a social dimension that we need to be addressing.
I hear you say.
Can I just say one more thing? I want to say one more thing.
Talk about that social component.
No, I'm not. Just before I come to that, I think the three of us were on a different platform, and we agreed that one of the things that is here is that the state has been completely hollowed out in the years, right? And particularly crime intelligence, for instance, on security, and that hollowing out is exactly the result of us not being able to ensure that what you refer to is we are able to respond much more agile. Right? And I think we have to recognize that. Right? So when we talk about the capacity of the state, we talk about the capacity of the state not only in one area, but in in crime and intelligence work also.
To give people a picture, without wanting to make excuses, Rudy, would it be fair to say, many people, for example, don't realize that when we took over in 1994, after the first democratic elections, South Africa was in fact bankrupt because apartheid had run out of steam.
Absolutely.
Are we there? Are we bankrupt after the 9 years of state capture? Is the situation the same in terms of just the lack of capacity, the lack of money, the lack of skills? Do we need to be as frank as that when we describe what we've got?
I don't think we're bankrupt.
There?
We're very far from being bankrupt. I think what we need to do is have a serious conversation around how we prioritize and what are the key focus areas. We can't do everything, and I think this is what we talk about in this particular book, that we need to reprioritize. Crime is really one of those particular areas that requires top priority. Health, another one of them. Education and the economy. These are critical areas that requires for us to be able to reprioritize our budget. We have still a bit of leeway. I mean, I think the one thing about the difference between 1994 is that 1994 we inherited an economy that was designed purely for the white population. Here we have an economy that's designed for everybody. What we need to do is give it more effectiveness in being able to get the kind of desired outcomes that we refer to. We know we're close to being bankrupt. I think what requires is an honest conversation, given our limited resources, to sit down and say, what do we prioritize to ensure we have the kind of effectiveness?
Okay, so if we do that, what should be done in the state? There's a section on state capacity and infrastructure. Talk me through the key recommendations that need to help us put this capable state in place, and give us examples that actually affect people's lives so people can understand some of these technical debates and how it actually impacts on the lives that they live.
So the first thing is that we need an ethical public service. That's what the chapter says. The second thing is that we need a professional public service where people are recruited based on merit, meaning qualifications, competency, skills, and expertise. And secondly, that we need a public service that understands what the agenda of this government is.
You know, you've made such an important point. You've said ethical, you've said professional. Now, let's go to ethical, right? We're talking about energy. Now, the Minister of Energy has appointed recently to the Energy Fund, the Central Energy Fund, a man who is twice accused of corruption. Now, if we are to have ethical leadership, Rudy Dix, how does someone like that even get into the line to be considered for such a critical post if the recommendations of this 25-year review is to be taken seriously by the public? Because I want to give you the benefit of the doubt, but when I see a person like that being appointed, when I see someone who was found guilty in the Eastern Cape, in the Department of Rural Development, suddenly emerging as an HOD of another department under Oscar Mabuyane, who claims that he's cleaning up, then I have my doubts. And you can't blame people for becoming cynical and saying the government is talking through both sides of its mouth because you're recycling corrupt individuals.
Yeah, I think that's the important thing, that we need to develop measures to avoid this kind of recycling, right, and backdoor, where some people who have been accused or have been prosecuted, for example, or have been dismissed in the public service, right, for a number of allegations, and it's been proven against them, and then they find their way from a province or from a particular entity into the system. I think that's what we require to professionalize and ensure that we put in stopgap measures to avoid those kind of situations. I can't respond to the specific example that you have right now, but I think there's many instances. The principle is very, very important.
Now, what people do, especially in the governing party, is they say the Integrity Committee has cleared me, as if the Integrity Committee has powers of investigation or can actually, find you guilty in a court of law. And because of that, the ANC feel that it's off the hook and it can deploy these people, when there are very, very serious internal procedures that have already put these people in a place where they shouldn't even be considered for the public service. I want to ask you guys a last question. In terms of the recommendations, we know that the Public Service Commission complains every year about the lack of compliance from Directors General down to people in the state declaring their business interests, that they're actually doing business with the state. What does the recommendation say about lifestyle audits and about upping the compliance mechanisms for people like yourself, so that I know you're not running a bus company on the side and making sure that your bus company is, getting all the tenders, or Rudy's not running a private security, because in Manenberg it's easier to get the private security than to get the cops to come and see what's going on when a gun has gone off.
No, you're absolutely spot on. The intention is to make it tighter, not the intention, the commitment is to make it much, much tighter. If you'd recall that the requirements to declare interest started at the top level, topmost level of management. It's coming down
Okay, so in this 25 years, what has been the compliance rate for top DGs to declare their financial interests?
Remember that this is a measure that came about as part of the reforms in the last few years.
But give me a ballpark figure.
So every DG, every senior public servant is required to disclose electronically.
Yeah.
So there's currently an electronic system.
But have they, Rudy? What is the percentage?
They have.
They
have. And the percentage is very high,
yeah.
Especially at that level.
Yeah. And if you're found to have been dishonest in disclosing, you are flagged. Right? And there are interventions that are taken against you.
Like as in you get fired?
Well, I mean, of course, there has to be an investigation first. You have to be given the benefit of the doubt to explain. But these are the kind of things. So can I use myself as an example? I sit on the board of Trade Industrial Policy Service. I receive no remuneration. I'm a board member there. If I do not disclose that I sit on the board of TIPS, the next thing is when I do disclose it, the first thing they ask, so do you receive an income? You know, you're not supposed to be sitting on the boards.
Maybe you should share that information with your trade union friends from COSATU, the ones who get paid to sit on boards and who don't want to actually declare that.
But the other point we're making is that the focus on the DG might also be misplaced.
Do you think the lower sections...
That's exactly what we want to
who are involved in supply chain management.
We want this system to be cascaded down to
That's
supply chain management.
That's
why the conversation is very important.
Yeah.
So it's easier for compliance from a senior management, from an SEM. Right, from DGs, Deputy Director Generals like ourselves.
But meantime, the gatekeeper is lower down and never actually gets a promotion, stays in the same position for 20 years.
Absolutely.
That's why we must also cast the light.
Yeah.
You know?
So we need to have that kind of conversation. The same onerous requirements disclose, because that's important. The supply chain management staff have lots of power, lots of influence. They make decisions on big contracts. Right?
Gentlemen, thank you so very much, and thank you for an excellent piece of work. For those of you who haven't seen this book, it's called Toward a 25-Year Review. It's a very candid, in fact, explanation of the policy decisions and its successes and challenges that the democratic government has been implementing over the last quarter of a century. Next up, we take a look at the stories making headlines in the weekend papers. Do stay tuned.